always say to everybody, if you hear people shouting in the garden, don't be alarmed. It's just Graham and I having a debate.
This little fella, who is lovely and pinky and bluey, was an absolute sod to germinate. It was awful. With gardens, if you allow yourself to play and go, do you know, I'm just going to try it. I'm just going to see what happens. If I don't like it, I can change it again. That's where you start to really understand how your space works and what you like and what you don't like.
It's interesting rather than spectacularly beautiful, much like all of us.
Hello, welcome to the 6th episode of Talking Dirty, Get Gardening's podcast for plant lovers. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, the fabulous garden on the Norfolk coast, we have Alan, Edward, Herbert Gray, Herbert the happy, handsome horticulturalist, who may or may not want to introduce me.
Well, I'm just going to say, sitting in the depths of Cambridgeshire, surrounded by water, I do believe, or you were at least this weekend, we have Thordis, Maria Sophia Friedrichsen.
Yes, it has certainly been very rainy. There was a moment when we looked out of our house and fortunately no floodwater came in, but it was like a kind of river running down the road. So we've had our fair share of thunderstorms, which is actually quite relevant to our mystery guest. So on my cue, the big reveal, who is behind the mystery window today?
Hello there, it's Stephen Joseph Coghill.
Ooh, sounds very proper. Stephen Joseph Coghill, head gardener at King's College, Cambridge, so just down the road from me. And that's how come I've invited you along to this podcast, because I had the most joyful, well, probably well over an hour, stealing away your very busy time, looking around the amazing plants in many corners of King's College and its grounds. And I imagine all the rain we've had has caused its fair share of problems for you, because you had a big kind of dry weather job lined up.
Oh my goodness, didn't we just? In fact, if you have a look on Anglia Telly's ITV news slot of a few days ago on Catch Up, you'll see us looking like drowned rats harvesting our wildflower meadow. And we've also got a nice bit of coverage in the Guardian and the Times and the like. So it's been really great fun. And we were working with Trinity College. We had Tom Hujenga and Sarah, is the deputy head gardener, over with their amazing alpine baler. That's a little baler, which is a sort of wheel horse baler that is used up in the mountains and the sort of the pastures of the mountains in Italy and Switzerland and Germany. And there we were, chugging across the wildflower meadow in front of the chapel, bailing to our heart's content.
It is typical though, isn't it, that in so much hot, dry weather, the day you schedule to bail up your wildflower meadow is the day that it chucks it down.
It's absolutely, well, you know, I couldn't have timed it better, because things have been so dry, and I thought, I know, let's go bailing. It's bound to bring on some biblical rain, and it did. You know, the rain was biblical. It was a toss-up between us building an ark or carry on bailing. The fact that we found a couple of unicorns hiding in the senior common room here is neither here nor there.
Now, I'm sure everybody in the world knows all about your wildflower meadow, but for the one or two who didn't hear what you did, this was a real big game changer for this absolutely iconic view in Cambridge.
Yes, it was. It's a fabulous thing. Since about the 1770s, 1780s, it's been a close cropped grass. And you know, if you're in the 18th century and you had large areas of grass that were scythed or grazed very closely, it was an indication of the fact that you were so fabulously wealthy. Here we were in the middle of Cambridge, and we didn't have to do anything productive with the land other than to turn it into a lawn, which would act as a foil for all the spectacular buildings. So it really was a statement of wealth and and privilege. And the lovely thing about putting a meadow there is the fact that, you know, it demonstrates very, very clearly that the Gardens Committee of Cambridge, of King's College, and that the Fellowship of King's College are happy to move with the times to respect and respond to what's happening with climate change, and do something which is carbon friendly, but do something which is also there for biodiversity and also there for sustainability. So it's been really great having a chance to walk the talk like that. And the reason why I'm a little bit dishevelled at the moment is we're giving away the bales to the other college gardens so they can strew the bales to produce more wildflower meadows. And I've just carried a bale to Joe Cobb, the head gardener of Murray Edwards' van, and just plonked it in here. So I am covered in oxeye daisy. Oh, that's corn chamomile. I've got a little bit of cornflower going on over here. Hysterical.
What I love, having got really up close and personal, which was incredibly lucky because most people got to look at the meadow from a distance with all of the kind of coronavirus restrictions and things, but I got to get up close and see how much was in the mix. Now, Alan, of course, you specialise in your kind of annual meadow at East Ruston, which is, I think what I love about the meadow at East Ruston is that you kind of happen upon it. You know, you're exploring the garden and you're going around corners, and then out of nowhere, you suddenly kind of round a hedge and there is this beautiful kind of cornflower, oxeye daisy, corn marigold mix with that church as a backdrop, and it is entirely magical. But I suppose, you know, meadows, they're very different things.
Well, meadows normally have grass in them, don't they? But I mean, ours is more of the cornfield is more of an arable field. I mean, it is the cornfield weeds, basically, of yesteryear, before we had systemic and the specialized sprays that actually kill weeds and leave the corn to grow. Selective weed killers is what I'm looking for. Before we had those, we used to pull all those sort of things out by hand. And you could see people sort of walking through the cornfields, pulling out thistles and goodness knows what. In fact, the corn poppies were very much a nuisance. Now, of course, we have difficulty in trying to get them to grow because we sow the seed every year. But the funny thing is that this year we didn't do anything. We just left the land fallow over the winter and we riffled it, just sort of riffled the seeds in at the beginning of spring. And, you know, it's the best it's been for many, many years. But there was an addition to it this year. There was something called Phacelia tenasatifolium, which, you know, is those blue caterpillar things, which is really grown as a green manure plant and ploughed in to put nutrition into the soil. But we leave it to flower. And I mean, it is one of the most fabulous plants for bees and butterflies. And that, I mean, you talk about happening onto the cornfield. What was happening this year, it was so productive with all the bees and the butterflies, you could hear it before you could see it. I mean, there was this buzz, which is magnetic, and I think it bowled everybody over. And of course, what we did at the end, it frazzled up very quickly, I have to say, because, and I'm sure Steve's did too, because, I mean, we had all that very, very hot weather. And so we chopped it down and took the top off because we don't want to put too much nutrition back in the vain hope that we would get rain sooner than we did. But we shall see. Now that we've actually had substantial amounts of rain, well, I say that, we've had quite a lot of rain, but it hasn't penetrated very deep. That's the problem. But at least if it's penetrated an inch, it'll be enough to germinate a few seedlings. And I'm just wondering, you know, if we're running downhill with the wind behind us and set a fair sail, we might just get a few flowers in there before we get to the end of October, which would be lovely.
It was interesting going to see the King's Meadow because you're right, it had Christopher.
Grand, doesn't it?
Oh, I know. My little personal tour, and it was amazing actually. I commented at the time that it changed with every step because it was this big blanket of russety tones, and you could just about tell there were little pricks of colour, but then the closer you got, the more into focus all those poppies and cornflowers that were still flowering came. But then it was particularly good, Steve, that you, when we got right up at the meadow, you could point out all the perennials that are now starting to come through, because this is a meadow that's kind of has many different ways and will evolve over the coming years.
Yes, it's fascinating. I'm particularly interested in the way the meadow will evolve because you know, we like Alan, we've been watching Nigel Dunnett's pictorial meadows sort of develop as out of Sheffield University, which I think is fascinating. And there's more plants there that I think could be worked into annual meadows. I mean, Ammi majus is a lovely plant that I'd like to see more of. Phacelia is fascinating, actually. If we were going to do this again, I think I'd incorporate it. But we're now managing the meadow to sort of change into a perennial wildflower meadow. But we haven't chopped off the annuals so that to allow the perennials through straight away. We're going to sort of manage the annuals out over a period of years. So this year, we would try and hope to cut the wildflower meadow, third week of July, final week of July. But this time we stretched it all the way through into the second week of August, so that an awful lot of the annual seed would fall back on the ground to act as a sort of a little bit of competition with the perennials which are coming through. But because we had that incredibly dry May, we didn't have any problems with the annuals falling on top of the perennials as they start to sort of clump up underneath them. And in a strange sort of way, the annuals acted like a nurse crop for the perennials, which are hiding underneath. And now, once we've now got all of the bales off it, underneath now all the bales are gone, and we're down to a little bit of a sort of a annual wildflower stubble. But underneath, all those perennials are green, they're lush, they're growing through. And when you actually stand back on Queen's Road and look back towards the chapel, there's no difference at all between the cut area and our mown lawn, which goes to show that when it's not a wildflower meadow, it's still a lawn, which is great. So we're very excited about what we're up to, and we're going to be naturalising bulbs fairly shortly as well. So ideas for bulbs from you and Alan will be much grateful.
Well, I mean, certainly you, Alan. What bulbs would you want to see in there?
Well, first and foremost, it has to be, I like natural looking plants. I don't like full-blown daffodils that have been fed on steroids and they've got big heads, but I do like plants like Camasias.
Oh yes,
and I think they work excellently for us. Funnily enough, it's one of those things where you have to go with your gut feeling, because if I'd taken any notice of all the horticultural books, including the RHS Encyclopedia, I would never have grown Camasias here at East Ruston, because we have a very free draining soil. Our water table is 20 feet below the surface, and it is said that they must have moisture. Well, I suppose I planted probably 50 bulbs, and in one patch we've got at least 500 today. So it just goes to show you they really do like where they are. And I think one thing that every gardener has to bear in mind, and I think Steve will probably back me up on this, is the fact that you have to go with your gut feeling. And if a plant speaks to you, 9 times out of 10 it will do all right, because they are nothing if not adaptable. I'm not saying that people assume that they like it because that's where they grow naturally, but that doesn't mean they can't grow in other sort of areas. And talking about meadow gardening, Steve, I don't know whether you've ever read the book but that Christopher Lloyd wrote on meadow gardens. It's probably out of print today, but you'd probably be able to get it. He was fascinated by the subject of growing perennials in meadows. Even to the point of planting peonies in meadows, and some of these things that you can't just go over it with a scythe or an Allen scythe or something willy-nilly. You've got to kind of dodge around it with a proper scythe or something like that, or even maybe a strimmer. But it was quite fascinating, some of the plants that he used to use. And I mean, one that we use in a meadow situation here is a cranesbill. And the idea, I think, is if anybody's starting this off and they want to make a meadow garden, the first thing is to try and knock back your turf. If you've got a rich soil, which we have, it's not so good because the grasses are very aggressive and very clumpy. So we need to get rid of those to start with. And the other thing is you use perennials that are tough. And peonies are nothing if not tough. I mean, you plant a peony today and come back in 50 years, the plant will still be there. That's the kind of thing that you want, really. And another plant that we used in our meadow is a very tall, late flowering inula that has big heads like sunflowers. I mean, it's just such a dramatic plant. It is absolutely fantastic.
Well, I totally agree with you, and I will have to get hold of Christopher Lloyd's book on meadow planting. Christopher Lloyd, by the way, was a Kingsman.
Was he?
Oh, he was, yes.
Yeah, he was here as a student, and I was in the archives a little while ago, sort of researching out on the grounds and gardens, because you've got to know thyself, and found a letter that had been written that George Salt, Dr. Salt, who was a fellow at King's, entomologist and member of the Gardens Committee, had written to Christopher Lloyd asking his opinion on a number of Crataegus that he wanted to grow on Library Road. And Christopher Lloyd wrote a charming letter back, commenting on how important it was that King's employed a decent head gardener, for they precede all, according to Lloyd. And yeah, so yeah, I've got a lot of time for Christopher Lloyd. I think he's in his time he's a remarkable man, and I love his waspish comments about plants. He once described what was it, Iliagnus Crossabingii as a plant that appears to consist of nothing more than ingrown toenails.
Well, another plant that he loved, and I'm actually looking for a place for it. I've got some actually at the moment, and he did love privets. Now people are going to think that privets are sort of common things, and lots of them are, I suppose. But he did love a particular privet, and it is ligustrum, and it's spelled Quihoui. And do you know how you say that? It's Quihoui, and you have to put the emphasis on the who. It's Quihoui. And the great thing is that he always said that if you say that, if you make people say that, laughter and joy will spread across their face, and they'll always remember that plant. And it looks like very much like a privet, but it has big heads of cream flowers in August and September. So it's a valuable shrub from the point of view that it's a late flowering plant, and it's got that fabulous name, Quihoui, and it's a great plant for pollinators too.
I love that, because so often I know you, Alan, can be, and I'm sure lots of people, quite disdainful about plant names because they are increasingly named in order to make people buy them for anniversaries or birthdays.
Oh yes, I mean, give a name to a plant and call it Ruby Wedding. I'll never grow it.
But it'll guarantee sales, so someone's winning.
Well, that's what happens, I'm afraid. Yes.
Now we've got quite the King's theme. Christopher Lloyd, a Kingsman, and actually, when it comes to FLOMO, our fear of missing out on a fabulous plant, which, Steve, I always go first, because without doubt I pick the most sort of boring plant that everybody else grows, because I'm A, the newest gardener, and B, have the smallest garden. But I'm also going to stick with the King's theme, having picked as my FLOMO a couple of weeks back that utterly amazing Campsus that you've got growing all kinds of different ones all over the place in different corners of King's. But another plant I didn't get the chance to mention in that particular podcast was, I think it was the Provost's garden, which people can't go to because it's private, it's the Provost's. So I was very lucky to get a look in. But all around the roses, you had an absolute cloud of, not a showstopper plant, but an absolutely brilliant foil plant. And I think it was calamint.
Yep, calamintha. Yeah, one of the little calaminthas. I love calaminthas. Many years ago, a friend of mine, when he was at Leeds Castle in Kent, held a national collection of calamint. Calamint was one of his favourites as well. And the lovely thing about this calamint, and I can't remember its cultivar name, but we'll put it up later, is it's one of the slightly taller calamints. And growing above it is a good old David Austin rose. It's Munstead Wood, which is that very, very dark, velvety. It looks almost like a sort of an early hybrid perpetual cross with a hybrid tea, but the flower itself is very trad, very old. It has that sort of Guinea feel to it. But like most HT style roses, the roses are gorgeous, and then the thing that happens underneath is really hideous. So what we do is we float the flowers on top of the calamint. And this year it's worked really well. The first year we planted it, we put on too much fertilizer and the roses vanished underneath the calamint. stems. Are there roses under there? Yes. But this year we got it right, so that the roses just float gently on this frothy foam of calamint, and it works so nicely. It's lovely.
And it was funny because I saw it and thought of you, Alan, because the amount of times you told me that, you know, roses need a good companion plant to really show them off, because they aren't necessarily leaf-wise, particularly if they're susceptible to black spot or something. They're not the most attractive plant. So this, I saw this and I was just like, yes, Alan would love this.
Yeah, they're pretty flowers on an ugly plant, basically. And they do have this kind of propensity to get all manner of diseases. And, you know, people can't afford nor want today to spray for all of those diseases. If you go to the National Rose Garden and you look at their beds of roses, I mean, it after a while, it gets faintly boring because it's monoculture. It's just one genus, you know, one plant and in various forms and all the rest of it. But I think that that calamint, I need to know the variety of that, because that sounds to me if it's going to be absolutely wonderful. I'm sorry, my telephone keeps going off. Isn't
You're very popular.
So that calamintha is your is your FLOMO, is it?
That's my FLOMO. Well, actually, I have another FLOMO here because of the dry weather. It's not flowering particularly over much at the moment, but my FLOMO is Aster divaricatus.
Oh,
yes.
Because it's an aster that likes shade and it also likes dry conditions. And I know asters like dry conditions, but this likes dry shade. And we've got a belt of yews that runs down from our Fellows Garden to Queen's Road. And it's one of the few plants that actually flowers with any sort of enthusiasm in this shade. And Aster divaricatus, I love you.
a love note.
Oh yeah.
Alan, you seem to be incredibly enthused. You leapt forth with yes.
Well, I mean, you know, it's not to say that I didn't know about these plants, but in actual fact, it's so useful. And something that's similar to Aster divaricatus, but it's an annual, is Erigeron annuus. And again, it's a white daisy, and it self-sows and it grows in dry shade, and it puts up with everything that you throw at it. I mean, you know, I grew it last year, and I harvested the seedlings, or Ian harvested the seedlings for me this year. I said, do about 20. He did 200, and we've used them all, I have to say. And they've gone in places where, you know, nothing much else grows like Aster divaricatus, and it's rewarded us with these white daisies, you know, throughout the summer. It's going over slightly now. But if you interplant that with divaricatus, the aster, you can carry on the show, can't you?
Yep, you can indeed. And it's a small world, Alan, because Jo Cobb, the head gardener of Murray Edwards, who's a superb plantswoman, was just here. We're just doing some plant swaps, and she just gave me a great clump of Erigeron annuus to say, collect the seeds, that you're still flowering now. And it all sort of fits together. Synchronicity, once again.
Yeah, it's marvellous. Well done.
I also think with plants, they're a little bit like, or there's anything else in life, you cannot see something for ages and then you'll see it all the time. You know, you'll see one and you'll really notice it. This happened with the Mount Aso willow that I was completely unaware of. And then I came to your garden, Alan, for, I think it must have been for Snowdrop Day, your big Snowdrop event.
Pink pussies.
these and because it was it had been raining, so all of those little pink pussy willow little catkins were all covered in droplets. It was show-stopping, and then I managed to walk away with one.
It's very strange because it's one of those plants that if you, I mean, to tell somebody about it verbally, you're flinching because you pink pussies on a willow, for goodness sake, no, don't take it away. But when you actually see it, you do like it. And we're trying to sort of do something a little bit more interesting. I've got 2 weeping standards, probably 3, I think, and a couple in pots and things. We're trying to do something interesting with them. I don't know whether we'll ever do it, but I have a yen to sort of kind of contort those weeping things into curls and twists. And, well, it'll probably be hideous, but never mind.
You got to try.
Yes.
It's funny because after I'd seen it at yours and got one, that was a very gleeful day when I went away having fallen in love with this plant. This is like being Alan Gray. It went from FLOMO to having the plant in the space of a few minutes. That was That was good fun.
Yeah.
But then everywhere I went, I seemed to see it. I saw it at the garden centre. My friend, who didn't even have a garden at that point, was messaging me saying, when I get a garden, I want this plant. So it's funny how it goes like that.
You want to know what my FLOMO is?
Yes, I do.
Well, this is going to knock your socks off, because I couldn't believe it when I learnt about this the other day from, and Steve knows Richard from Sloten's, Richard Van Edmond.
Wonderful man.
Yeah, he is a very good fella, a very good friend. And he said to me, you ought to try this hydrangea. And I said, well, it's wonderful about it. You know, why should I? And he said, well, it's worth it for the name, if nothing else. And I said, well, what's the name? And he said, it's Joe FLOMO. It's JOFLOMO, Joe FLOMO. And it is, I don't know that it's going to be, you know, it's not going to probably knock people's socks off, but what it is, it's a small bun-headed macrophylla with white flowers, but each white flower has a pink eye. And again, I don't know whether that sounds nasty on the description or not, but anyway, we are going to try that. So my FLOMO is a Joe FLOMO.
Oh. Doesn't get any better than that.
No, it doesn't, I don't think.
I think we all need one of those.
Well, I'm sure Richard will be propagating it like mad.
The other thing we like to do with our guests is a spot of show and tell, which can take any form. It can be a bunch of flowers, it can be a plant, it can be an old tool. I did say to Steve, he could bring an old tool if you like, because I know Alan's got a penchant for an old tool. But what have you gone for a bit of show and tell, Steve?
Well, books. I love books. Books are wonderful. You can just lose yourself in a book. They take you on a journey. But this is a journey that's very, very practical, and it's very exciting. And if you have a copy of this and there isn't a bit of blood on the page, then you haven't done it right. This is the Grafter's Handbook. Okay. And this is a new edition. I thought it wouldn't be a good idea to show my old edition, which is full of holes from various slips with grafting knives and the occasional sort of wound. But the art of grafting and budding is just one of the sort of the high points of the craft of horticulture and propagation. You know, I have a friend who said that horticulturists come in a number of different flavors. There's a garden designer that looks on plants as material. And then there is the propagator and the nursery man who looks on plants as from a point of view of how many cuttings can I get out of that plant. So you know, how many times can you cut it into tiny little pieces to make more. And the Grafter's Handbook is really a wonderful book for people like that, because grafting is one of the exciting things that you do when you're making new plants. You know, I've been budding and grafting for years, but there is an astonishing budding and grafter out there who still manages his garden out in the Suffolk landscape near Little Glenham. And of course, he was the propagating director for Knot Cuts, and before then it was at Hilliers. And he came over to Kings a little while ago with John Dieter and Ivan Dickens, and I'm damned if I can remember his name. It'll come back to me in a minute. He terrified all of my colleagues at college, all of my student friends at college by his spectacular knowledge of propagation, and it will come back in any second now. I'm going to have one of those light bulb moments. But by budding and grafting, you can produce plants that otherwise you would not be able to. And the art of grafting and budding also means that you can make plants do things that they wouldn't normally do. And, you know, from a point of view of roses, we've spoken about roses. And of course, roses are tea budded. And tea budding is something that happens in July. In order to actually get a uniform rose crop and uniform rose plants, you usually tea bud the roses that you actually want to grow onto Rosa laxa dumatorium, and that's a really fun thing to do. And when you actually bud and graft plants, it gives you that wonderful sense of doing something slightly more than taking a cutting and putting it in compost. So there's that more sort of intervention thing. And then you can have a lot of fun as well. Say, for example, in the Provost garden, we planted a whole bunch of apple cordons on a, on a MM106 rootstock 4 years ago. And they originally all held together by canes. And we took the canes off earlier this year because we grafted them all together. So the whole of the structure is now grafted together so that it is actually completely solid. It needs no support. It produces fruit. The fruit don't droop because on the branches because they're all held together. And it's wonderful. And it's all because of the Grafter's Handbook. So rush out and buy it, but also buy a bumper box of plasters as well.
Actually, I think that's an incredible book. I mean, there's a couple of things that about grafting here is that, I mean, if you, for instance, if you get a magnolia, for instance, Magnolia campbellii, if you grow it, that's the tree magnolia, which we see down. And the wonderful thing, if you grow it from seed, you can wait up to 50 years for the seeds to bloom, the plant to bloom. But if you graft it, you can get the plant to flower in between 5 and 10 years. And quite often you can buy grafted plants from Burnco's nurseries down in Cornwall. They have the National Collection of whatever it is at Caerhayes Castle. And so they have access to some stupendous plants. And one or two of the magnolias, I bought them here. They're a bit more expensive. They probably cost you between 60 and 100 pounds per plant, but you don't have to wait forever for the flowers. And the other thing that I've got in the garden that I find fascinating, and so do my visitors, is Catalpa bignonioides, the Indian bean tree. And we've got Catalpa bignonioides, and on the top of that, we've got these tiny little heads of Catalpa bignonioides nana. So we've top worked the dwarf one onto an ordinary stem so that you get this very compact dome of foliage. And it's shall I say, it's so smart, it's very Parisian.
Ooh la la.
Ooh la la.
It's interesting you talk about the magnolia, because from our years on the radio together, Alan, if there was one question that came up over and over and over again, it was, when will my wisteria flower? And my heart went out to these people who bought a seed grown wisteria, and who knows how long they could be waiting.
Well, you know, the problem is it's not just the seed grown wisterias, it's sometimes that the mother plant, if you like, who is being grafted, she will shoot underneath the graft, and those shoots will always be stronger, or even maybe the graft will fail, but she will shoot from down below, and everybody sort of thinks gamely that, oh, look, my wisteria is doing really well, it's growing, how many flower buds are we going to get? And of course they don't get any, and that's mainly the reason for it. And I think one of the things to be careful of is to make sure that if you buy a wisteria that is grafted, and you should buy a grafted one from a good nursery, make sure that you keep your eye on below where the graft is, because any shoots that come from below that, you need to rip them off. And if you can tear them off, it's better than cutting them off, because if you cut them off, they'll regenerate the whole time. And once they start, they won't stop very easily. So you've got a job for a very long time.
Every year I get wisteria envy. I'm kind of trying to hold fire because I want to put it on my forever home. And I've always kind of thought, after all of the questions you've answered on the radio about this, I think I'm just going to buy one when it's in flower. Also, I've visited gardens before where people have done mass plantings of wisteria and it's not been the colour they wanted because they bought it not in flower. So I think that's what I'm going to do.
All of those things happen. I mean, they're not intentional, but it's genuine mistakes, I think, a lot of the time. I went to quite a large country house to present the owners with a trial for opening their garden for the National Garden Scheme a couple of years ago. And there was 2 plants growing on the front of this hall that which I thought was rather wonderful. One was a wisteria, which they gardeners carefully pruned, but it went up 3 stories. It's an enormous plant. And the gentleman of the house, again, that's all right, Steve, you're not alone. I can't remember his name either.
I can remember that, Brian Humphreys.
Oh, right, well done, well done. Anyway, Simon is his first name. Simon said to me, my mother and Simon is shall we say, a mature gentleman. He said, my mother used to get the gardeners to take the Banksian rose off the house, trellis and all, and lay it onto the lawn, lower it onto the lawn so she could prune it from her standing position and then put it back again. And this thing went up 3 stories. So can you imagine the logistics of doing that?
Oh, that's really quite ridiculous.
Well, do you know what? I think we've run out of time. We haven't got time for any questions or anything. We've talked too much about Meadows and grafting and show and tell and FLOMO, but I've had an absolutely wonderful time. If you do have a question, and we'll try and answer it on the next episode, you can pop it in the comment section on our YouTube podcasts, or if you're listening to this on the audio version, or if you're watching the YouTube version but you'd like to email and attach a photo, you can send that email to hello@getgardeningnow.co.uk, and Alan Gray and whoever our next mystery guest will be, and we've got all kinds of exciting guests not to make you feel unexcited, Steve, because you were one of them. We'll answer your questions in the coming episodes, but for the time being, Steve, thank you very much for joining us from King's College and giving us that kind of behind the scenes detail on the meadow and all the baling and getting covered by oxeye daisies. And everybody, happy gardening.
Happy gardening.
Happy gardening. They now hold the national collection of aeoniums.
Oh my goodness.
That's a way to lure Alan Gray somewhere.
Sorry, my tea went down the wrong way.
Well, I keep trying to get Alan to come over. I keep trying to take him to... now I've forgotten the name of something. What's happening?
You've changed your background.
I know. This is my...
Who did the Fuzzy Wuzzy of Lilibet?
Me!
Oh, right.
I've tried to put all kinds of special things on it. Like the...
Yes! Do you remember that?